Every so often, I get to talking with people, and they ask me about my past camping experiences. When I mentioned that my last RV was a small trailer and that I built it myself, they find that interesting. Well, I decided to make a video about my little trailer. Back then, I didn't have a video camera, but I did have a digital camera. I took pictures of several steps in building it. I also had a friend of mine convert the hand drawings into AutoCAD, so I could get more accurate measurements. The method I used to build it was to use lap joints and made each section as a panel, then screwed it all together. This helped me ensure all the pieces fit well. It also made for strong joints. Here's a picture of my little trailer. It's about 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. I used a 9,000 BTU air conditioner on the roof with the built-in heating element. I think I used the heating element far more than the air conditioner, mainly because I was usually out and about during the heat of the day. I had no trouble pulling the trailer to my favorite camping spots. The only time my fuel mileage was affected is if I drove over 70 miles an hour. Of course, it helped to have four-wheel drive on some of those more out-of-the-way places. Unfortunately, the trailer frame is no longer available, at least the last time I looked at their webpage. Too bad, as it is really a nice trailer frame. 2,000 pound capacity, so no need to license it in Kansas. Of course, the first step is to build the floor frame. I used 2x4s for round the edges and 2x2s for the connecting joists, which made it strong but not too heavy. Well, maybe a little bit heavy. Of course, a trailer needs an undercarriage to protect it from weather and road hazards, so I installed sheets of aluminum. And of course, the aluminum had to be bent so the walls would not be exposed to the outdoors. A hammer and a block of wood did the trick. As I discovered later, I bought aluminum that was thicker than needed. But that's okay. That means it'll handle rocks and debris better. By applying undercoating on the aluminum, the seams were sealed and also added more protection to the undercarriage. With the aluminum attached and the undercarriage coated, the floor could now be turned over to work on the other side. I had to drill mounting holes through the floor and trailer frame and then use some large bolts to tie them together. Naturally, the floor needed to be insulated. Then, the floor panels needed to be glued and screwed onto the frame. A little sanding and the floor was ready for the next step. I rolled out some vinyl and glued it to the floor. No seams to mess with, and it's water resistant. The first wall frame to build is on the driver's side. Lots of joints to make and curves to shape. It was like putting a puzzle piece together. Of course, it helps if each piece is pre-cut to fit. And then the inside paneling is attached. Lots of paneling glue, no screws. Then the door opening was cut out and vinyl beading attached to the outer frame to provide a seal between the connecting panels. And of course, there's always the passenger side wall to build. It was pretty much the same process as the driver's side wall, of cutting each piece, gluing them together, and attaching the paneling, and cutting out the door openings. The roof frame was an interesting challenge. Spacing the openings for the air conditioner and powered vent took a few adjustments in the design. The roof joists are 2x4s cut to 3 inches and tapered down to 2 inches on the outer edge for a sloping roof. Each piece was then screwed and glued together, a very strong roof. Of course, the roof needed to be insulated. I used double sheets of 1.5-inch foam board with the reflective side pointing away from each other to reflect heat. The room partition separates the living space from the storage space. Since the partition is an important part of ensuring the trailer holds up under road conditions, I used oak boards to frame it. I also used oak plywood to attach to the frame, then ran a bit of stain and sealer over it. Now the upper half of the partition is divided into 2 compartments by this panel, curved to match the rear wall. More oak plywood panels, stained and sealed. The upper storage needs to be separated from the lower storage, another frame job. This panel was fairly easy to make. Just painted it and primed it, left it that way. The lower storage area also contains the battery, so I needed to make a battery box with these two panels. And then when it's all assembled, it stands up and gives a good idea what the back of the trailer will look like. Now it's time to build the front wall and the back wall and the rear hatch doors. Since the rear hatches had round corners, I had to install these small plastic corner pieces. It was easier than trying to cut curved wood. At the front of the trailer, over the bed, was a cabinet with several divided sections. To match the rear partition wall, I used oak boards for the facing and simply painted the plywood for the rest. Time to assemble it all. First, the rear wall and storage area are placed on the trailer floor. The passenger side wall is attached to the rear partition, which helps it stand up for the rest of the assembly. The driver's side wall is attached to the rear partition and the front cabinet installed. This ties the front walls of the trailer together. With the cabinet doors, lights, and electrical panel installed, the partition wall comes to life. And with the cabinet door, reading lights, and headboard attached to the front wall, the interior is done. Now installing the roof, that was fun. I had to hoist it up to the garage ceiling so I could then lower it onto the trailer. The thing weighed a ton. I used fiberglass paneling for the interior of the ceiling. The divider in the upper storage area made a convenient place to run the electrical wiring to the roof. When the panel is attached, no wiring is exposed. Since the roof was pitched, I had to trim the foam insulation to fit the angle. I used nichrome wire to heat up with a little power supply. Made a nice cutting tool. The ceiling material was secured to the curve of the rear wall, which closes off the upper storage area. Then the rear wall and framing can be attached. And the same done on the front wall along with the insulation. The foam insulation board had to be scored to fit the curve of the front and back. For added insulation, sheets of reflective insulation material were wrapped on the front and back of the trailer. The sides were also wrapped. Somewhat thin plywood was attached to the roof and sanded smooth. Before the roofing material could be applied, the rest of the trailer had to be taped off. The rubber roof material requires a special adhesive. It sets up moderately quickly, so I had to glue the front half first, then the back half. After the rubber roof material is glued, any air bubbles needed to be removed and the material trimmed to fit. Aluminum siding was added to the rear and the taillight wiring was exposed for hookup. But first, the hatch openings needed to be cut out and the hatches installed. It looks like the hatches work. The aluminum siding was attached to the front as well as that shiny diamond plate piece. Originally, I was going to get some pre-made doors, but I really couldn't afford the cost, so I decided to take a risk and build my own. I first installed the vinyl door jambs so I could get an accurate measurement of the door size and the piano hinge. The driver's side door is the same as the passenger side door, so once I framed one, I could frame the other. I made sure the frame also included a place for the door handle. And of course, the door had to be insulated. And now the fun part, cutting and fitting the aluminum siding over the door frames. The aluminum siding was wrapped around the frame and secured. After cutting the opening, I installed some windows that crank open to provide some proper ventilation. And on the inside of the doors, I installed paneling. With all of the hardware installed, the doors are attached to the opening. A strip of butyl tape was run and the aluminum corner trim and rain gutters were attached to the seams. The battery box needed a little bit more work. A mounting plate had to be installed for the battery box so it would fit the intake air vent through the floor. And the air exhaust battery vent has to be installed. The powered roof vent was installed on strips of butyl tape, and the mounting screws were covered with lap sealant. Then the interior vent trim was installed, but I had to modify a ceiling joint trim piece to go around the vent trim. And I had to add a few finishing touches, like a spare tire mount and a trailer jack. All that's left to do now is find a place and set up camp.